Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with data center consolidation strategies in the federal government. With me today on the show are Melonie Parker Hill, the Division Chief, Enterprise Operations Center at the U.S. Department of State. Mr. Jerry Pender, the Executive Assistant Director, Chief Information Officer, Information and Technology Branch at the FBI. Frank Konieczny, the Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Air Force. Andrew Price, the Engineering Manager, Public Sector at Checkpoint Software. Steve Wallo, the Chief Solutions Architect at Brocade Federal. And Bob St. Clair, the Senior Architecture Manager at Red Hat. We're going to talk data centers and virtualization, maybe work in a little bit of cloud and managed services along the way. But let's get started with Melonie Parker Hill. Melonie, tell us a little bit, give us some examples of some progress you're seeing being made at State Department with data center consolidation.
Sure, Jim. Over the last 10 years since the FDCCI mandate came out, the department has made great strides, basically closing down 10 to 12 smaller data centers, actually collapsing them into 4 enterprise data centers that we have throughout the U.S. We also have a small footprint in various areas in the local DMV, Department of State here. One of the great things that we're doing right now is we're looking at high availability and disaster recovery footprint. We're looking to decrease our overall size while also maximizing cost savings for the department. Another great thing that we are actively pursuing right now is a modular data center. Mm-hmm. And basically the onset of that modular data center, which will be released later on this summer, we will be collapsing 11,000 square feet of data center floor space into 1,000 square foot of data center floor space. We're able to do this or achieve this by virtualization, mm-hmm. cloud computing, and other technologies that are present.
Yeah, it's really cool watching this whole thing evolve and all the new technologies coming out now, the modular approaches mm-hmm. and things getting smaller and so forth. So it's been interesting. And I know the new CIO for the government has made data center consolidation continuing priority. So I think we're into this for a while. Frank, over at U.S. Air Force, tell us a little bit of the progress you see being made over in your area.
Hi, Jim. The first thing that has to be done for data center consolidation is to figure out what applications we have. And since the Air Force is rather large, like 128 bases across the board, we have data centers in each of those bases. In fact, we have multiple data centers at each of those bases. We're doing an asset inventory of all the equipment and doing an overlay of the applications because we need to figure out which duplicative applications we have at the various bases that can be consolidated into mm-hmm. a central data center as well as what applications actually need to exist at the base for mission effectiveness. At the same time, we're developing a process to put a tool set out there that would be automatically do the inventory for us and to maintain it because we have to have sustainment, especially as we start moving things from the bases to the core data centers. We have to keep track of where they are going and the interfaces, all the external interfaces that they have to make sure that they work properly. And at the same time, we're doing a pathfinder for what should the base infrastructure look like in the virtualized environment. And this is going to be a dynamic one because we've gone to both a COCO model and a GOCO model and trying to figure out what is the best. Should we actually do a modular, put it on a slab and try to figure that out. And so we're going to look at the pathfinder to figure out, based on each base, what should be the best configuration for that base.
Wow, cool. Yeah, I like the idea of doing that application inventory first. It makes sense if you're going to consolidate. You just don't want to move stuff as is. You might as well try to virtualize, modernize, and maybe throw away things you don't need anymore, that kind of thing. Jerry Pender over FBI, tell us a little bit about progress with data center consolidation in your area.
Well, the FBI, we're part of the Department of Justice's mm-hmm. revitalization program. Mm-hmm. And so certainly one of the first things you do is put together a program with a governance structure, got that done. So far, DOJ has consolidated from 110 data centers down to 48, so made quite a bit of progress already in that regards. At the FBI, we've built a virtual platform and have put over 100 different applications onto that platform. We did some pilots with some innovative cooling technologies before we get into a big data center project. Some of the successes in that, we've had PUE's, power utilization efficiency ratings below 1.1
Oh, wow.
in some of the pilots, so we're really excited about that. We've defined the strategy for the department that there'll be 3 core enterprise facilities. The FBI is going to operate 2 of those, and we've done the A&E studies to build those out.
Wow, cool. Yeah, that's a good point, too, the energy savings, because I think, I remember reading somewhere that power cost is one of the bigger costs in some of the larger data centers, and now with new cooling techniques and new technology advancing with cooling, there's a tremendous amount of savings to be had there. I might want to follow up sometime with you and hear about what you're doing there, because one other thing we do with this show is I talk to everybody else. If I see something that's being done at one agency that's a success story, I like to get that word out to other agencies. Andrew Price over at Checkpoint, tell us what you guys do to support your government customers in this space.
Well, I think the biggest thing we focus on beyond technology is sharing information and being a technical resource for our government partners that doesn't come with a price tag or a bill of materials afterward.
Right.
Our big goal is to bring our customers in direct access with our actual security researchers and the people that are making the products, as opposed to just salesmen and just
Right.
people trying to sell something.
Yeah.
I think that's our most important thing.
Moderated panel. Last week we had Shemendra Paul talk about information sharing too. We were talking about how it's changed so much now with the amount of data that can be, with the business analytics, the amount of data that can be managed these days, and how much more information can be moved around. So, fascinating area. Steve Wallo, how about the Brocade Federal? Give us some ideas of things you're doing in this space.
Sure. So it's really 3 things, and Brocade Federal is really about providing the infrastructure to support all this data movement.
Right.
Some of the 3 things that we're looking at, first and foremost, as Frank mentioned, you have to figure out what you have. So we spend a lot of time looking at visibility. How do you see where the data is flowing? How do you see where it sits, where the hotspots are? What do you need to move and where do you need to move it? So, that's, I think, first and foremost. The other part is we want to make sure that whatever we provide the agencies, the federal government, in terms of the infrastructure, that it's simple, that it's easy to manage and it's easy to manipulate and it's agile. It has the ability to move itself around and self-heal really from a virtualization side so that you can provide the infrastructure and the services to help this movement across data centers as you work forward through this process. And the last piece is, especially in the government world, and I was there for 15 years, is that if you can't buy it effectively, it doesn't really do you any good, right? So we spent a lot of time coming up with unique programs. We have some unique network subscription models that allow you to purchase these things that you want to do in a much simpler form and not have to use a lot of capital expenditures to do that.
Right.
You can go back and you can use the operational part of your budget to go ahead and put these pieces in play that you need to move stuff around.
Yeah, I'm going to lead into that in the next question. We're going to talk a little bit about managed services, and the fact is a lot of agencies are in a position where they're not going to get bump ups in CapEx money. So it's going to be how do we use OpEx money to make these capital investments.
Yeah, exactly.
Bob St. Clair over at Red Hat. I think of Red Hat, I think of open source. Is there opportunities here for as these data center consolidations move on? Tell us how Red Hat is positioning to play in that.
Absolutely. We are known as the Linux company, the open source company, open standards, and our source code is publicly available to everybody. And that's our model for development within Red Hat. When you say data center consolidation, I think it means different things to different people.
Sure.
So it can be forklifting, it can be BRAC, it can be shutting down of bases. It is different ways that we work with our customers. We've had lots of customers. We have customers that are looking at DISA first for their data center consolidation. For us, I think it's about having a good relationships with our customers, understanding what their needs are, understanding what they're trying to accomplish. With open source technologies, we feel like we can provide cost-effective ways of helping our customers with open standards and technologies that allow them a lot of flexibility we encourage people to start consolidating with, I've heard other people say, with virtualization and doing the little things first.
Yeah, I like that novel idea of trying to understand the customer first before you actually do something. It makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit here about virtualization. It's come up, cloud computing, managed services. Let's start with Jerry Pender this time over FBI. Jerry, when I think of data center consolidation, and then we have all this movement with cloud, everybody's doing virtualization. We heard already a little bit about managed service approaches. How do you sort of like figure all that stuff out? How does it work into your strategy when you think these things through?
Well, we think that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a portfolio of different things that we operate, from legacy proprietary things where we do co-location, to virtualization, to private clouds, depending on other government agencies as service providers to get services from other agencies, public cloud and managed services. There's going to be a portfolio, and everything's going to be in that portfolio for the foreseeable future. And then which approach you take, there's a lot of decisions to make. It really depends on the degree of interconnectivity and how much the applications are integrated, the security requirements, the predictability of the load, and the pace of change. So
Wow.
you pick the right thing out of the portfolio based on those kinds of criteria. Certainly one of the things that the Justice CIO, Joe Klimovitz, is emphasizing is the importance of optimization. Just co-locating and putting things together
Right.
doesn't get a whole lot of benefit. It's really
Right.
about optimizing what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard some horror stories where that hasn't happened, where you're trying to consolidate and you move from one center to the other, but you didn't have the money to move everything from the first center to the second center. So now you're paying for two centers instead of one. So, there's some stories like that, which leads again to the point of planning in advance and studying these issues through in advance to figure out which way you're going to go. Melonie, how do you work the issues of virtualization, managed services, cloud into your thought process when you're thinking about your data center consolidations?
Sure. I think what Jerry just expressed, the State Department uses those same philosophies.
Okay.
It's key to understand, okay, what is first? We have a lot of people that are used to still hugging, we refer to them as pizza boxes.
Yeah.
And we understand that they have become accustomed, but now trying to introduce these strategies and the benefits of optimizing through virtualization and things of that nature has shown a benefit to us. We actually increased our virtualization platform. We're over 70% virtualized across 4 data centers,
Wow.
which is a great number for the Department of State. Another thing that we do is it's kind of a competition because you have the private sector, they can offer cloud computing and other services for agencies. Well, we actually have in one of our facilities on the West Coast, we have over 15,000 square feet of data center floor space that's available for other agencies, federal agencies to come in and look at, and they can build out according to customized to their needs. So that's something else that the Department of State has to offer.
Yeah, I think that seems to be evolving too. A lot more shared centers, and I think some culture issues obviously that jump into that equation, but it just makes sense in so many ways. And I think I'm also seeing going to public clouds with administrative things, but keeping
Private cloud.
sensitive data or critical mission. But over time, even that seems to be getting involved as FedRAMP comes along and people begin trusting that a little bit
Yes.
more and so forth. Frank, how about virtualization, managed services, cloud? How's it work into your strategies?
The Air Force has been virtualizing applications for several years already. In fact, Hill Air Force Base has virtualized over probably 500 applications now into one facility. And the main drivers for that was basically cutting out the cost of the system admins and cutting out the cost of the licensing associated with the products. So we are ready to go for virtualization. We've now defined several platforms as a service that are standard across the Air Force that all new and emerging applications have to go to. We've set up an office to support that migration. So it's dedicated to just doing the migration, to helping the users and the PEOs actually do that migration and move into a cloud data center. We have our choice of cloud data centers. We can go to DISA for the CDCs. We can go to our bases, depending on mission needs. We can also go to commercial.
Okay.
And so we're looking at all 3 of those options. And based on mission needs, we're going to choose one of them for each of the applications. And going further than that, we now want to set up a tool set where we can automatically provision into any of those environments. And so what the concept is that we have the office set up. We have a tool set to actually support this against our standard platforms. We can provision it into a CDC for the DEX, or we can provision it into a cloud, or we can provision it into both.
Wow.
It'll be automated as to what we want to do, and part of this tool set is to actually come back with the estimated cost it's going to be for the user.
Wow. So you got all kinds of options available. Bob St. Clair, how about Red Hat? How are you guys looking at managed services and virtualization and cloud and all those other issues floating around out there?
It's interesting to hear everybody talk because I think we're all on the same page, and I think Red Hat's uniquely positioned for this space because Red Hat started as a Linux open source company, but if you look at us today, our strategy is the open hybrid cloud. So the public clouds, the managed services are part of the way we live and work today, and we need that ability to shrink and expand our services. So Red Hat can help build that data center, but we also have an open hybrid model where we're talking about easily giving customers the flexibility to move data back and forth between private and public clouds.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that, a lot of that going on right now. And all the shows we're doing is the decision about what can be public, what private, and in some cases hybrid clouds, where some of the parts of the system reside in the public and some reside in private clouds. Andrew Price over Checkpoint, how about virtualization, managed services, cloud computing? How are you guys viewing that, and how's that work into your...
So our number one driver with that is to make sure the experience for security products in the physical world is the same as the virtual world. And so it's not just sticking with a particular virtualization vendor, it's making sure that whatever we provide can run on whatever customer environment there is. There's another thing I kind of wanted to touch on with virtualization. Go back to what Frank was talking about with automation. When virtualization started, a lot of the focus was reducing server space, reducing costs on hardware. But I think the real return on investment will come with automation. When you can easily provision servers almost like you're doing a Visio diagram, that changes the game, and you need a lot less people to do it, and you spend a lot less time working on it.
Yeah. Excellent points. Yeah, and I guess virtualization started, people were just thinking about space savings, but now it's like we're virtualizing everything, virtualizing desktop, virtualizing pretty much, the term itself is expanded to encompass a lot more than just space saving, and so forth. Steve Wallo over at Brocade, want to talk to us a little bit about managed services and virtualization, and sounds like the kinds of things that you would be, Brocade would be involved in pretty heavily.
Oh, definitely. And one thing to look at is through the process of data center consolidation. We've been looking at this for years. This is something that started a long time ago. But through that process, there was a fundamental shift in the way that data moved, and we call that the new IP. But what it essentially refers to is the fact that the sources of the information are now mobile. They're wearable technology, all the social media pieces, and they apply differently to the different agencies. But that's a paradigm shift in the way and the amount of data that's flowing through the environment. It's no longer the stuff that you had in the 70s and the 80s. It all came from one spot and it landed over here. Now what you're seeing is the proliferation of data can be coming from anywhere in the world in any way, shape, or form. And when you pull that together, the way that you have to design and think about not just the network, but the rest of the IT infrastructure changes. And that's really what that new IP is about. So what we do is we take a look at it and say, okay, now how do we address this new shift, this new culture shift in the industry? So virtualization, that's pretty much the norm. When you start talking about server virtualization, if you don't do it, you're old school, right? From the network side, it's a little bit different. It's something that is a little bit new to us, and we're at the point now where we're starting to take network functions, the old hardware boxes that you would put on a cart, you'd roll in somewhere, and we're virtualizing those functions, and that allows us to have that agility when you start talking about cloud and moving things around. I can fire off these network services in a virtual environment very, very quickly, and that allows me to be able to scale those as well. From the cloud computing side, that's just a business model change for us. It's the ability to move the resources around to where the business needs those. And when you start talking about, like Andrew mentioned, the security side of that, we have pieces that we can put in there to help that movement and make sure that it's secure. You don't want to lose stuff in flight to somebody else, right? Those are two real big things for us. From the managed services side, it's really about providing people like the systems integrators that work with these different agencies the ability to take the information, to take the products and get them into their systems, get them checked and procured in such a way that they're readily available at short notice to provide services to the agency. So when you roll all that together, that gives us this approach to this new IP, which is something different that you need for the different way that data is moving.
Absolutely. Sounds like a major change management process, or not to. Change management is changing to become even more complex to incorporate all these different ideas in as you move along, and the organization adopts to all this new ways of doing business. So interesting, very interesting approach. We need to talk about lessons learned, what we're learning through this process, and maybe some challenges and things like that. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Melonie Parker-Hill from State Department, Jerry Pender from FBI, Frank Konieczny from U.S. Air Force, Andrew Price from Checkpoint Software, Steve Wallo from Brocade Federal, and Bob St. Clair from Red Hat. We're talking data center, virtualization, managed services, et cetera. When we went to break, we were talking about those topics, and I think what we've been trying to work into the show are some lessons learned to date. Some things that you guys are encountering along the way, perhaps to pass on to your other government colleagues that are working these same issues, and some industry folks that are working the issues. So let's start with Frank this time. Frank, what are some of the big lessons you're learning as you go through the process here that you might pass on to some colleagues out there?
Okay, the first one is after you do the application inventory, to look at what other applications and databases this application actually connects to. Because if you try to migrate something off into another data center and you don't consider all the back-end systems that attach to it, you're not going to be able to actually work effectively. And that includes systems that don't run like every hour,
right,
that run every month.
Yeah.
Because that's usually the killer one. The one that you never know about that runs every month, that depends upon the data that you have in your application. All of a sudden, there's a trickle effect of applications that fail.
Yeah, you don't want one of those oops, like, okay, ready to turn the button here. Whoops. Good point.
Then the other things are basically, of course, in the DoD, we are concerned about the impact level of the data. What that is actually is it mission data, is it publicly releasable data, and that will determine where you actually can put it in what data center, because it has to be mission effective. And lastly, the usual problem that you have is after you clear out a data center, what do you do with it? There's refurbishing costs, there's reuse costs, and people forget about that cost because you just can't board it up and say, especially on a base, this is now a deserted building, and don't go to it.
Never thought about that one, especially on a base. You're right. You're right.
So there's that issue, and as Steve mentioned, for the software-defined networking, we're looking at that too. Is how do you do now? Add that to the list of things that you want to do, especially on a base,
right,
for the data center and anything else you want to do.
Right. Interesting. Some interesting points there. I never thought about some of that. Melonie, how about at State Department? What are some of the things you're learning as you go through this process here that you would pass on to some colleagues out there?
Well, it's great to hear that we're in line with a lot of the other agencies, similar things to what Frank just mentioned. You have to understand your inventory. It's nothing like, as Frank expressed, to move a device and then a month later, 2 months later, maybe even a year, some annual payroll things or something like that may run, and you forgot that back-end database. Oh, someone's not going to get their W-2. That wouldn't look good. One of the things that Steve mentioned down there was if you're not virtualized, you're old school. So trying to get the old school people to buy in to say this is a great thing, will save you money. Hey, give me your requirements.
Right.
I can procure you, or I can release a virtual machine to you within two to 3 days max, depending on, priorities, versus you having to go through acquisitions, find $5,000, $10,000 to procure these things. I can release this on the fly to you. So getting that buy-in from the old school people that Steve referred to was a key as well. And this also having the stakeholders buy-in. And when I say stakeholder, we're talking about the security people. We're talking about the facility owners and those type of folks.
Right.
So.
Melanie, this is our 118th show, and every show at some point we talk about that culture issue and change, and the fact that there's so much change going on. And I always think of the Bobby Kennedy quote that 1/3 of everybody's against everything all the time, no matter what it is. Jerry, what do you think? What are some of the lessons you're learning here as you work your way through your programs?
The biggest lesson we've learned at the FBI is the importance of the mission value of the consolidation. The mission doesn't stop because we're doing some IT initiative in the back end, and so it's really key that you get you identify the mission value of the consolidation effort and get mission leadership buy-in. That's just absolutely key to the process. I think that the second thing, as far as the consolidation across the Department of Justice, we have many different components with very, very different missions. So understanding the requirements for different competing missions is extremely important, and identifying those requirements up front and early in the process. And that said, even though it's important to get the requirements up front, almost inherently you're going to get them wrong. So the ability to adjust as the mission changes or the financial system changes or technology changes over the life of the program. And then the last, I think, significant lesson that I'd talk about is the importance of engaging with industry leadership. Really, in many ways, the government, the federal government, is not unique in terms of the mission or IT requirements we have. So we spend a lot of time going out to private industry, to financial services, to retailers, to medical kinds of places, which are facing very, very similar problems. And so learning from the best in the industry has been a real good value for us.
Yeah, some great points you just made there. I like that idea of mission value too. You know, we're not doing this because we're saving space. Well, we are. I mean, that's a reason, but it's really about focusing on the mission and making sure as we go through the process that the mission's either is not going to be impacted or it's going to get better and improved as we go through the process. And I like that reach out to industry. Occasionally I'll bump into government people that say, well, I don't meet with industry. And I was thinking to myself, well, how do you ever learn anything new? I mean, how do you know what's going on out there if you're not out there talking to some people that have some best practices out there, you know, and how important that can be. Steve and Wallo of Brocade, what are some of the lessons that you guys are picking up along the way here that you might want to pass on?
Sure. So just to play on with what Jerry was saying, you know, we also reach out to the end user customers, right? You can't develop something in a vacuum because then nobody uses it, right? So that's extremely important to us as well. The other one is, and this is kind of something that Brocade's really passionate about, and it's that you got to break out of the status quo. You got to quit doing the same thing that you've always done in order to get a different result. And one of the things that's real important to us is just this concept of open standards. And it used to be where if you want open standards, it was interoperability. It was my gear that was able to talk to somebody else's gear. We weren't using some proprietary piece. And now that's expanded. And when you start looking at data centers, it's no longer just the network or the servers or the storage. It's how they all play together. And when you start talking about, as Frank mentioned, software-defined networking, that's a concept that enables you to put a different level of control across that infrastructure. But it's not just the network infrastructure. It's also the servers. It's also the storage. And it's the orchestration above it that controls everything. Specifically, how do things move between data centers? Or how do I move information within a data if some instance occurs that was unseen or, you know, hopefully not something that was really bad. So when you start talking about those different layers, that interoperability extends up as well as east and west. So, you know, it's can I work with the new orchestration tools? Can I work with the Red Hats and the checkpoints and everything else to get that kind of information flowing throughout the process? And what happens is when you start looking at open standards and you start to get open standards in your organization, here's what happens. It's that as technology changes, that best of breed player changes as well. And when you're using an open approach and open standards, you have the flexibility to move into different areas that your business needs by being provided with this new leader in that technology. You're not locked into just one piece. And I think, you know, that's something that, you know, when we start talking to our customers, this is the lesson that we're learning. It's that get into open standards, get out of the norm of what you've been doing in the past that allows yourself to really have the agility to move forward.
Right. Yeah, good points there too. You know, and if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're certainly not making progress, are you? Back in the days I was running the Federal CIO Council, I actually proposed that we give an award to someone who tries to do something innovative and different and take a big risk, and maybe they fail. But we at least give them an award for trying. It didn't go anywhere. It got shot down, but it wasn't the only WFED idea I came up with, but the idea was to get people to not be doing the same thing and to try to do something different, take some risk, try to do something, you know, by nature, I think government, there's some risk averseness in a lot of different areas. And in order to get innovative and creative, you got to break out of that mold. Andrew Price, what do you think? What are some of the lessons learned along the way?
I think the biggest lesson learned is don't squander the opportunity you have by re-architecting your data center. And what I mean by that is, we have these legacy applications that exist, and they've been running forever, and no one wants to change them. And now that we're doing consolidation, we have the chance to make a change. So you can address some of the lingering security needs, re-architect what you have in this opportunity when you're moving things.
Right.
And there's a term that I like that I've heard called technical debt, and it's where you just let something
heard
pile
that.
up because you're so afraid of the stability of it, that you have 10 patches to do, you're still running Windows 2000, whatever it is. The opportunity to fix that is there when you're doing your consolidation.
Yeah.
So, some people are risk averse and don't want to kill two birds with one stone, but I would rather kill four birds with one stone and solve my problems.
Yeah, I hear that technical debt term all the time now, and it's a way of looking at some of these applications and where are there tremendous amounts of inefficiencies built in, where are there security holes, and there's tools out there, good tools that can address that. And it really is about reducing your cost and rework and errors and everything else. So very good point there. Bob St. Clair, what do you think from the standpoint of some lessons learned along the way here?
I've heard some good points, some really good points. And I think, having a methodology, having a plan, and having a well-thought-out plan, I like the idea of, you got to have an inventory of your hardware, a detailed inventory of your applications. You got to know what the low-hanging fruit is, how to be successful. And I think as we've helped customers, consolidate and migrate, having a phased approach makes sense so that it's not success or failure. It's a phased approach. So you do it in incremental steps and can show success to the people that are paying the bills and your customers, so that it encourages them to continue on with the innovations, the efficiencies that you're looking for, and other things.
Yeah, I think that incremental approach we're seeing across the board in all kinds of things, with agile development, and I think in some cases because the government's attempt to do the big bang billion-dollar programs, go over cost and time frames and so forth. So the more you can do incrementally, little success stories along the way at a time, it seems to be the approach for a lot of things these days. Let's talk about some challenges. Obviously, funding is one. We've already talked about that, and using OpEx money for CapEx things. But what are some of the other big challenges that are out there? Let's start again with Melonie at Department of State. Melonie, what's some of the challenges or things that you still need the constraints you got to get by to get where you want to go with these programs?
I think the major thing here for us here at the State Department is competing priorities. And just having the ability for the resources to be available, not funding, as you just mentioned, however, resource of time, resource from other stakeholders and customers. There are so many things that are going on, and there's always an emergency, and this thing may trump the other thing. This is my number one priority today, but next week it may be something different. So it's just those competing priorities. That's one of the main things that we have going on at the State Department. Unfortunately, as the division chief in the data center, I don't manage all of the network people. I don't manage certain pots of people that I would need to get things done. So therefore, I have to coordinate and schedule with them. So sometimes it's just a little difficult.
Yeah, I moderated a panel of CIOs a week ago, and that same issue came up about the fact that there's a whole lot of things you'd like to do, things that are very innovative, can reduce our cost and whatever, but there's only so many people there and so many resources available, so you have to really figure out where can you draw the line to make the progress you're trying to make. Frank, how about in your area? What are some of the big challenges or the hurdles you got to still get over to get where you want to go with these programs?
Besides culture.
We're
not going that one again.
Yeah, I know. You guys are probably too young to remember that Groucho Marx show, but we have where someone says the secret word, and the term culture should be our secret word every show. At some point in time, the thing that came down on the Groucho show would come down. But anyway, back to you, Frank.
Governance.
Governance
is important, and especially with a large organization like the Air Force. If you want to move applications, you have to have some governance as to supporting that and fixing the priority issues, because otherwise the tendency is not to do anything. And that's usually what everybody defaults back down to. It's easier to keep going what you have than it's to change. And on top of that, when you talk about change, you have to think about the transition from the old system to the new system. Even though it's not new, there is an overlap period there where you have to be very careful, especially within the Air Force, because you transitioned for an application. This application may be feeding all the bases. So you transition big bang overnight, all the bases? Probably not. You transition a base or two bases, and you keep on going across the country and to Europe. So there's a time span here when you have to keep both systems running. And then you also have the data transition. Because if you have both systems running, you're feeding data into one system and not feeding it into the new system. And so you have to have some reconciliation across the board. So when you talk about movement across and migrating, it's not simply for us to just move it to another data center. A lot of times it's complex as to how you do the transition across and to how to keep everything straight.
Yeah, excellent points. We a couple months back, we had a show on profiles in excellence, and we followed up with a publication. I wrote an article that didn't have publication, and I focused on most of those points you just made, talking about how do you achieve excellence. And I focused a lot around governance and having the processes in place in order to be able to get the things done you want to get done. So excellent points. Jerry Pender, what are some of the challenges, the constraints, the things you still got to get accomplished or get by in order to get where you want to go with these programs?
There's a few that I'd highlight. The first one, particularly in data centers, you're looking at building something that's going to last 25 years. So the difficulty in forecasting what you're building for, the mission's going to constantly change, the financial environment, the technology that you're putting into it. If you can predict what 25 years is going to be like, you're smarter than I am.
I can only go out about 23.
The second thing I'd hit is a lot of focus on consolidation and having less data centers with less physical access. But there are certainly requirements for physical access to the data centers. Within the Department of Justice, for example, our litigating components often get data from external sources where they're having cases, and they have to get onto the network and onto the system huge amounts of data, and that actually does require some physical access. So kind of balancing that remote automated stuff with the physical access for onboarding data is a challenge. And then the last one that I'd hit is it's not really a funding issue, but an accounting issue that often, as you're making the changes in data center strategy, the cost savings and expenses often come from different budgets, and that can be difficult organizationally, right? So if you're shutting a facility, and maybe your facilities organization is saving on some lease and power payments, but the IT organization is now paying an outsourced cost, right? So net it's a savings, but the money's coming from different budgets, and that can be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've been in a number of sessions which government CIOs and private sector CIOs, and when you talk about the technology, the issues are pretty similar. But when you talk about different challenges in the government world, you have the things that you mentioned, like forecasting, the fact that we have sequestrations and we have shutdowns and we have budgets that go up and down, and you can't really predict that far out. And you have the inability to move money from certain object classes to others and so forth. I know it came up big time when we were talking about telecommuting and teleworking and training and all, reducing training costs. Well, most of the reductions comes out of a travel budget, which is not an IT budget, and so those kinds of things jump in there. I want to hear from our private sector folks on this too, but first we're going to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. To the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Melonie Parker-Hill from the State Department, Jerry Pender from FBI, Frank Konieczny from U.S. Air Force, Andrew Price from Checkpoint Software, Steve Wallo from Brocade Federal, and Bob St. Clair from Red Hat. We're talking data center consolidation and subjects associated with data center consolidation. We were talking about challenges. We heard from our government guest. Let's go to Bob St. Clair. What are some of the challenges you're seeing in working with your customers trying to achieve some of these issues, these objectives?
Sure. I'll focus on security. I think security is a big part of Red Hat, our history. Everything we do is we focus on security. If you look at the technology today, there's containers, there's OpenStack, virtualization, there's public clouds. Almost every customer we have, but in particular the government customers, are extremely concerned about security. So it's something that and the technology is evolving so fast out there in the community, the world, the other vendors, that we really have to focus on security. So it's making sure that when we release a product that everything is ready for commercial use.
Yeah, clearly, I think that one is, the amount of emphasis on cybersecurity these days, that cybersecurity has to be first and foremost when you're thinking about any type of technology change or movement these days. Steve Wallo, what do you think? What are some of the challenges that you see that you have and you see you're working with your customer in order to get where you're trying to get with these programs?
Sure, and just to add on to what Frank was saying about, if there's something different, sometimes the government just doesn't do anything at all, right? I think overcoming that, again, we call it the status quo, but it's just doing something different to get, a more efficient approach to the way that you're moving information around. And then to add on to the security part of it, a lot of it, from our perspective, is multi-tenancy. When you start to consolidate people together, right, sometimes those people don't necessarily have the same knowledge set in terms of what they can share. There might be different communities of interest, not necessarily different security levels, because you want to keep those kind of contained within themselves. But different communities need to share these consolidated pieces. And from our perspective, we want to make sure that, one, you have the ability to carve that information up, but do it in such a way where you're still sharing the same resources, because you can't get into the area where, yes, I've consolidated all these data centers, but I've essentially just built the same thing 3 times in one data center now. Right? So what I want to do is I want to have common resources that everybody can use, but I want them to use them in a more efficient manner so that each person is sharing the resource but has some separation in terms of who can see their information, not only in terms of the processing, but where they can share it to. And when I start looking at virtualization from the server side and the storage side and the networking side, that applies and helps that problem a lot.
Yeah, I see that as like a continuous improvement cycle as you're going through the process. Andrew Price, what do you think? What are some of the challenges you're seeing that need to be overcome to get to the place that you really want to be?
I think one big thing when you're doing consolidation, when you're doing automation, when you're doing a lot of this, is to not forget that as you're consolidating things, you're bringing the keys to the kingdom in a central place. And don't forget to protect that. If you look historically at some of the recent cyber attacks, Target, for instance, they used their patch management system to spread malware. So as you've consolidated things, remember that you have to put extra protection there, because the value of that target is significantly higher than it was when everything was spread out among different organizations.
Yeah, excellent points. Again, it's like change management, and and when you're trying to get away, I guess, from the Band-Aid patching approach to get more proactive. And in some cases, I think when you're doing data center consolidation, cloud and all that, you do have a chance to sit back and reflect and try to look at the big picture again, rather than all those incremental changes that you've made in security along the way. On all of our shows, we talk about the future. We try to get some predictions about how these programs, what will they mean to, maybe 5 years out, and what will we see in government 5, 10 years attributed? Obviously, we're doing this because we think it's a good idea. It's going to improve mission, save money, and all that. But what's it look like in the future for you guys? Where's this all going? How will it improve government processes? Let's start with you, Bob, and we'll work our way right back down the table here. Share a vision for us for the future. What benefits and improvements do you see in government as a result of going through these programs?
I hope that as the cloud, as we all evolve to the cloud, the open hybrid cloud, that we're sharing data, we're making sure it's secure, that we're given our from a DoD perspective, the warfighter, applications that are faster and better than previous generations. This whole DevOps thing, we haven't talked about that today, but platform as a service, DevOps, it's about getting the change management, doing things faster, deploying faster, getting things out to the edge faster. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and where the technology goes, it's hard to say. I hope that it's open source and it's a great vendor.
Yeah, I know the next generation coming up. I have kids and grandkids, and I know when they're in the workplace, they're going to expect things a lot faster. I have a 4-year-old grandson that came walking in carrying my phone and looked at me and said, "Grandpa, what is your password?" And I said, well, what? I told him the password. He punched it in. He's going through the app. The kid's 4 years old. So yeah, they're going to want things quick. Stephen Wallo, what do you see as, what's your crystal ball look like? What's the future look like down the road as a result of these programs?
Sure. So we can talk about two things. First, we discussed that new IP, right? The ability to work inside of the new era where things are changing so much, whether it's cloud or social media, things like that. And we'll reference your grandson's phone, right? When you look at a phone, and I've used this analogy before, it's how do you buy it? How simple is it to use? How well does it work with other things, and then what happens when you drop it, right? The same thing applies to an infrastructure vendor as ourselves. How do you buy it? We talked about this network subscription model. We got to give people the ability to use different types of funding to solve their problems, right? Those operational monies to solve capital expenditures, right? And I think that's something you're going to see going forward. The other piece of, when you look at the phone analogy, it's, okay, well, how to use it? You got to make sure that you're providing people that need the services a plug-and-play mentality, right? When I go and I want a drink of water from my kitchen, I turn the faucet and I get some water. I really don't care what the plumbing looks like under the house. I just want the water. And the same thing has to happen from the network side. You want to be able to just use the network in that particular manner. It's simple when we start talking about things like Ethernet fabrics and those type of technologies where you just drop them in, and they provide the service that you expect with minimal touch, zero-touch provisioning. The other piece of that was, how well does it work with others? And we start talking about open pieces, right? We want to get to the point where the network almost has applications behind it, and software-defined networking will drive that, right? You'll be allowed to say, I need a new routing service, or I need this or that, and you just kind of push a button, and poof, it pops on your network, and you have it, and you're able to use it.
Yeah.
And then it has the feedback mechanisms to do the self-healing that everybody expects. Yeah. And then the last piece is, for God's sakes, if you drop your phone, what do you do, right? I can give you all the greatest things, but if there is a problem, and there will be, right, that we're all well in a practical world, you got to have the services and support behind it. And it's not just from a networking perspective, because everything ties together. You got to have services and support that the whole IT infrastructure is responsible for. And that's where the managed services pieces come in. You want to be able to have one phone call that has somebody that can see everything inside that environment from the whole IT perspective, which is, I think, what the CIOs are looking for.
Excellent. Andrew Price, Checkpoint, what do you think? What's it look like down the road?
So down the road, I'd like to say anyone going to college now, make sure you specialize if you're looking at IT, because I think the days of the generic IT guy are numbered.
Oh,
The more you invest in automation, the easier it becomes to set up a server. And if you think of even 5 years ago, how many people were employed just to pop a disk into a server and set it up?
Right.
That's done. So make sure you, especially security, I think that's a good one to do. The other thing with automation is you get new power. You have the ability to react automatically when things happen. So if you have security events, for example, let's say a server gets compromised. What do you do now? Do you go unplug it? Do you move it somewhere? When you look into the future and the capabilities we have, the reaction to that will be automatic. So if a server is compromised, you could have a system, and you could actually build this now, that will take the server offline, take an old backup of it, put it back, and apply additional protections to it based on what happened. And this all just happens behind the scenes without any kind of human interaction.
Cool. We've talked about, I participated in some webinars where we talked about the future world we'll be living in, decision-making as time begins to approach zero. I mean, that's where we're going in terms of how fast with messaging and things like that. And when you look at terrorism and everything else, decisions are going to be made in split seconds, and that time issue is going to be a challenge. Jerry Pender, what's it look like down the road? What's the crystal ball look like? What's the world going to, the FBI going to look like down the road after you make your way through these programs?
I think about the future in two different ways. What does it look like, and what's the mission value that we're getting out of it? As far as what it looks like, I think we've hit many of the points already. Highly automated, things happen really automatically in a speed and efficiency perspective. A green data center. So we've talked a fair amount about energy efficiency, but water efficiency, waste efficiency, having the whole environment be green. Certainly everything's moving more towards high density, strict physical and logical security, much more than we have right now. Having that portfolio of approaches in our pocket. Flexibility, really the ability to adapt as the technology and mission changes, and scalable. We have to scale up and down with the mission and the requirements. As far as the mission values, I think the future is about improved security, improved information sharing, which is one that I don't think we've hit on today. But as you bring different components and different organizations together that right now are copying data back and forth, the ability to do that in a much more efficient, straightforward way. So information sharing to improve the mission. More agility. There's really a push to get things out quicker. Lower costs, higher availability, and enabling people to do things for themselves. 10 years ago, people came to IT to do things for them. And corporate IT led the consumer. It's certainly different now, right? The consumer is leading the corporate IT, and people are coming with an expectation that they're able to do some things for themselves. Absolutely. So figuring out how we enable people to work within a framework is really key to the future.
Excellent point, sir. Well said. Good job. Frank, what do you see as, what's it look like down the road to you? Where's this all going?
Well, we see the airmen actually focusing on mission instead of focusing on how to make a data center work.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
I mean, that's the whole point of all of this. We see a commoditized, ubiquitous way of getting cloud services that it's easy and you pay for it just like you pay for electricity, as opposed to doing the major procurements that we have to do now.
Right.
We see that in terms of security, availability, reliability, and especially resiliency, the ability to switch between data centers as you need to automatically and have backup and COOP capabilities. And we always talked about the automation. We want to make it just as easy to dial a phone number as it is to bring up a cloud service and move your apps around.
Yeah, I like that idea of moving towards the utility and the analogy that Stephen made, because if I look at the mission of the FBI, the U.S. Air Force, State Department, the high-level mission and what those agencies do, I don't think I'm going to find something in there that says manage IT infrastructure. Melonie, where's this all going? What's it look like down the road to you?
Perfect segue with your last statement. Although our missions are different, we share the same fundamental viewpoints as my other colleagues here from the federal sector. We are looking at more denser technology. We are looking, as I mentioned earlier, the high availability disaster recovery type of footprint. We're looking at converged technology. We also are looking at being a facility provider. Again, we have 15,000 square feet of data floor space for our other agencies to view and look at out on the West Coast. So we're just looking at across the government in all of those areas to achieve, again, it's amazing to sit here and listen to the colleagues because we share the same values and goals across the board. And that's a good thing, a good feeling.
Yeah, tremendous. We'll do a shout out. State Department has available space.
Yes, we do.
And I love listening to you too, because I feel like these shows keep me smart. I mean, it's like me of being tutored every show we do, because I hear what's going on in the different agencies and from smart people, and that gives me a lot of things. Let me do some summarizing. I take notes as I always do, trying to pick some of the high points we hit when we talked about progress. A couple things I heard there was the importance of doing an application inventory, the importance of governance and having governance in place. I heard about understanding the customer as making sure that is a focus. I heard about energy savings that are being achieved with some new cooling technologies. When we talked about the virtualization and cloud managed services, basically, yes, we're doing all that in addition to data center consolidation. They're all intermingled issues that are all being worked jointly together. We talked about security and the need for security as a driver as we move this direction, being out there. And a lot of conversation around change management. This is a big change management kind of an operation. There are a lot of cultures here. There's a lot of same old walls that need to be broken down. And you need to remember to keep all the pieces intact, and so we don't have certain things slipping. On that, we talk lessons learned, and I think, Frank, you brought that up, that you have to think of it as a system and all the pieces that fit together, because as you move certain things, you want to make sure that things are going to work the way they should work when you actually do these crossovers. A lot of conversation about the need to understand inventory and get an inventory in place prior to making these moves, and looking at things maybe that we don't need to do anymore. And are there ways, the technical debt issue came up there about, are there ways to make things more efficient before we actually move them along, and it reduce some of the inefficiencies we have in some of our systems. And I heard, I think it was Jerry bringing up flexibility and adaptability. We're going to need to be able to be very adaptable and flexible as these new requirements enter into the scene. Challenges, competing priorities, resources are always challenges. Governance, good governance structure to make sure everybody's on the same page. Being able to forecast and understand what the budget picture might look like the best we can. And then security jumped in there too as clearly a challenge that can't be overlooked. Future, we see more sharing, more shared environments. Perhaps some of these culture issues do break down some of these things, and we see more hybrids and shared data centers and so forth. We talked about speed and the fact that the future, it's going to be decision-making. It's going to have to be fast. We're going to have to adapt quickly. We're going to have to be agile and make changes very, very rapidly. We talked about convergence. A lot of these technologies will converge, and that will be some challenges in the terms of how we do that. And I think in the future, the thing that drove home to me the most is the mission focus. IT should be a utility, and you should focus on mission, and the infrastructure and the IT support will just be there. It's a given. It shouldn't be things that anyone's worrying about. With that, I want to first thank our panelists for taking time from their busy schedule. Obviously, you all have very senior level jobs, so taking the time to come out and be with us is something that we're grateful for. Thanks to our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio who do such a good job helping us put this thing together. And of course, most importantly, thanks to that listening audience out there that tune into the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.